Now, I'm going to let you listen to a recording of Breonna Taylor from an incident and one of those misfortunes she had with Jamarcus. This is from the Daily Podcast, dated September 8th and 9th, where they covered the story of Breonna. So I want you guys to take a listen to just one of the things that unfortunately happened due to her entanglement with Breonna Taylor.
And pretty soon into her relationship with Jamarcus, his problems become her problems. And this is the first time that you see the police coming and knocking on the door of apartment 4 at 3003 Springfield Drive. Breonna?
Is this your place? Yes.
And they came because of a favor that she had done for him.
Okay. So, what's your name, young man?
Jamarcus.
What's that?
Jamarcus.
Jamarcus. What's your last name?
Glover.
Glover?
So what happened is she had rented a car. Her own car was apparently in the shop. So she had rented a car from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and Jamarcus Glover asked her for the keys. She handed over the keys. He then handed them to a third person, a man. And a couple of hours later, that person was found dead, slumped over the wheel of the car. His body was riddled with bullets, and on the floorboard of the car and in the console, they found several baggies of drugs.
What I need to know is what's going on with the rental car and the person that was in that car.
I don't know who was in the car.
She never used the car.
At home and
That's all we need.
The person that ends up dead at the wheel of the car is a man that's known to them only by his nickname Rambo. And in fact, he's the brother of one of Jamarcus Glover's associates, a member of what turns out to be a criminal drug syndicate. And that man had gone to jail on multiple occasions with Jamarcus.
Are you all into the game?
Oh, no.
I mean, come on now.
No, I mean, I was now.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Let's just be honest right here, okay?
I was. Now, they ain't got nothing to do with the game.
I'm not saying gang. I said the game. Are you working? How do you make his money? How do you make your money?
Oh, no. I have. Now, I've been in the street before. No,
Are you working now?
No.
Where you work at?
I don't work right now. I just left my job over the weekend.
Where were you at?
Yeah, I'm in Louisville Metro.
What were you doing for them?
EMT.
I saw the police notes, and they concluded that Breonna really had no foreknowledge of how this car was going to be used, and that Jamarcus also did not appear to be aware that this man was going to get killed.
All right, man. Hey. Take care of yourself, all right?
Oh, yeah. See you later, lady.
Be careful, all right?
So as you heard, unfortunately, from this relationship, Breonna was entangled in his mess, and that's serious. When you have a rental car, and I don't know about you guys, when you have a rental car, you're responsible for everything that happens in that car. That young man died in that car. And although she had nothing to do with it, her name was on there. So any blood, anything lost, she was held responsible for that. And that was due to her association with Jamarcus. So we don't know if this resulted in, and God, rest that young man's soul. But we don't know if this resulted in her not being able to ever rent a car again. We don't know if this resulted in, her, being looked at funny by police officers knocking on her apartment door. There's a lot to that, and I assume that Breonna's mind began to shift and go, exactly, yikes, like who is this guy? And so you see them having on again and off again relationship. But by 2020, Breonna has been motivated to push forward. She has been you know, focusing more so on getting herself together. She gets 2 jobs. You see in the middle or end part of 2019, she gets a new car. Even one of her tweets was so inspiring. She said, I have no debt going into 2020. I'm working on a house. I'm working on establishing a healthy relationship with Kenneth Walker. I'm working on a baby. And you see that infamous video of her and him, and he's like, you know, how many kids do you want to have? And she says, do you want to have kids with me? He's like, yes. And she says, well, when you want to do it? And he says, now, you know. So she's focusing on the positivities that's happening in her life. You know, she talks about all of this, you know, things that are happening that are working for her. Jamarcus is long gone. That chaoticness, that craziness that is a result of him, that's all gone. She's focused. She's found purpose. And although I do read her tweets and she's like me, and she's like, I'm tired. Oh my gosh, like, you know, but she stayed motivated. She was so motivated that one of her tweets that I found to be really funny is that she got up in the middle of the night thinking it was time for her to work. She goes outside, it's 2 a.m. and she doesn't work until it's 2 p.m. So you see a girl that is really, really trying to focus on bettering herself and trying to focus on making her dreams her reality. And one of the tweets that I found of Breonna's is that she says is that I always show the love before I see the loyalty. And that's my biggest downfall. My heart is too big. And I think, you know, that can be said about Jamarcus, you know, and her relationship with him. You know, her heart was too big. She was trying to help him. She was trying to get him to a place where he didn't really have to do that. And unfortunately, you know, those types of people, if they're not ready for change, if they're not ready to see things differently, then they won't. And so Breonna moves forward and Jamarcus does what Jamarcus needs to do. So, you know, Breonna's family after March 13, 2020 continues to fight for her justice. And that is because the Louisville Police Department is not forthcoming on what happened on that fatal night and why it resulted in a no-knock warrant. And they're not giving them a lot of the information. And so the family is like, this is an innocent Black girl. This is an innocent Black woman, you know, and we're trying to figure out why you guys are not forthcoming, why you're not telling us the truth. What's the ins and outs of this case? And they get a lawyer and they start to investigate, you know. Even before we heard about it in May, you know, they were still, you know, keeping her name out there and keep pressing Louisville police to give them more information. So I want to go over some things about what we know about this case, what we know about March 13, 2020, what we know about Breonna Taylor. So what we know is Breonna had broken up with Jamarcus prior to the no-knock raid warrant, prior to the raid, and she had blocked all communication from him. We do know that Jamarcus did have some things sent to the house, some mail sent to the house. Now, the police department, I guess, tried to say that this was drugs that was sent to that house, but the U.S. Postal Office for the area said they never said that or identified it as drugs. They mostly identified it as materials like shoes, clothes, different things of that nature. But we do know that Jamarcus sometimes used Breonna's address to have an address. Now, if you know anything about working in the police department or county jail or anything like that, you have to have an address that can be verified. And so I think Jamarcus, because he know how to work the system, he used her address as his address as well. That's another thing we have to be mindful of, ladies, and even gentlemen. We have to be mindful, you know, people using your addresses and people doing different things at your house, and especially in Jamarcus's case. So that's what we do know about that. and that, you know, the police department tried to get the post office to lie, and they're like, we're not a part of this, we're not into this, you know, we're not about to lie and tell you guys that just so that you have is in your favor. We do know that Jamarcus was arrested before the no-knock raid, and that his time of being arrested might have been altered to favor Louisville Police Department, because if they arrested him afterward, then they can justify the no-knock raid. But it appears that he was arrested before they went to Breonna Taylor's home. What we do know also is that statements from all of the officers involved in that fatal night have been withheld from the community. We do know that the Attorney General Cameron, in which we will talk about, is saying that he will release all of the information. But as of right now, we know that those testimonies have been withheld. We do also know that during that raid, there were more than 70 police officers around those raids and there during that time. So you have Officer Mattingly, Hankinson, and the other officers, the three that we continuously hear about in the news. We know that they're specifically from Louisville Police Department, but there were a lot more officers involved. We do know that there is no autopsy, and that if there was one, it has not been released, and maybe Attorney General Cameron will release that information as well. We do know that the police report is fabricated. They lied blatantly on that police report regarding that night. They list Breonna's injuries as none. And we do know that she was shot by them 5 times. We do also know that officers were told that the no-knock warrant did go to a knock warrant. Now, what we do know is that there is one neighbor who is Jamaican testified that he heard the officers announce themselves, but as they were announcing themselves, they told him to go back in the home. So he only heard it once. He is the only neighbor to testify that he did hear an actual introduction of police to Breonna Taylor's home. The others do not. We do know that there was no follow-up prior to going to do the no-knock raid to Breonna's house. Had they did a follow-up, they would have known that Breonna and Jamarcus were no longer linked to each other, and that she had been in a consistent relationship with Kenneth Walker. They also did not scope out Breonna Taylor's home to see how many residents lived next to her, to also see who lived in that house. They were aware that Breonna lived in the house. They were not aware that Breonna and her sister, and occasionally the godchild, was at the home. And so that's one thing that they did not know. We also found out that after the search of the apartment after Breonna's death, there were no drugs found. There was no money found. There is a recording of Jamarcus talking to some young woman that he was currently with, talking about Breonna had some money, but we don't know what exactly he meant by that. We don't know what he's talking about, but there literally was no money found in that home, and they searched that home quite a bit. We do know that the 70 officers that were included that night, up to 70, sorry, officers that were included that night, were not all in cohesiveness with the other officers like Mattingly and Brett Hankinson, which means that there was no talk prior to this about the scope of the apartment, because they did not look to see about the scope of the apartment, the neighbors, who Breonna was, you know, if, you know, the person that they were looking for, if he was big in a gun possession, if Breonna was suspected of having a gun. They did not have a huge talk at all, so there was no cohesiveness. It was an entire mess. It was an entire mess that ended up in an innocent woman's death. The only officer fired and charged, but those charges were later dismissed due to Attorney General Cameron, you know, different things like that, was Brett Hankinson. What we do know about Brett Hankinson is that there were a lot of people who had allegations against him for harassment, for sexual harassment as well. We also know that Brian Hankinson, after Breonna's death, March 13, 2020, get this, he disappeared. He went AWOL for 2 hours after that shooting. Yes, I did say he went AWOL for 2 hours after that shooting. Now, riddle me this. Whenever there is a police shooting where an innocent life or a guilty life has been taken, protocol in any police officer, any police station, the protocol is that a superior stays with the police officer that shot fire. They're supposed to stay with that person the whole day so they can receive testimony, injuries, they can go over injuries, they can go over reports, the whole nine. They're supposed to stay with a superior. We do know that Brian Hankinson went AWOL for 2 hours. We also know that he was not fired until May or June of that year, of 2020. This incident happened March 13, 2020. We all know that he should have been fired. None of us can go AWOL at our jobs without being fired. We know that for a fact. You can't go AWOL at Walmart for 20 minutes and your supervisor look for you and you can't be found and you think you're going to keep your job. Brett was protected and he was able to keep his job even after going AWOL for 2 hours. And we've seen this before. Where have we seen this before, guys? We've seen this also with the Philando Castile officer as well. Now, the only difference with him is that his superior allowed him to go home that night without any report, without any testimony, and come in the next day in the afternoon and give his testimony. You're not supposed to do that. So we see a lot of corruption as a result of police shooting and what and how they are allowed to handle it. A mess. So from what we know, that this case is super complex and it calls for more than just arresting these cops that killed Breonna Taylor. It calls for way more than that. It does. The reality is it causes for a system overhaul, a system that we know started way before Breonna Taylor, started way before this policing expert Robin Engel came in. It started before that prom king being stopped and searched while trying to get a Slurpee. It started way before then. It started with a system that has been corrupt for years. You know, they consider Kentucky as the birthplace of slavery and auctions and different things that way. So you have a system that has been corrupt and has been disproportionately affected the most by Black people. You know, we have a system that has never been in favor of supporting and helping Black people, but we have a system that, you know, is entangled in destructing Black men and women, and Black men in particular, you know, and that is the problem. The system is corrupt from the head on. You know, you have to talk about the fact that no one followed up on this no-knock warrant. A judge willingly signed the paper so that they can do the no-knock warrant without going over the case to make sure that they had follow-up on Breonna, that they knew exactly what they were getting themselves into. On top of that, we have this policing expert, Robin Engel, who develops this plan to follow, you know, this area of high crime. So the police are putting way more money into this area, trying to figure out what's going on there, instead of trying to figure out how they can help that area. What's missing from that area? Is it jobs? Is it poverty? Is it, you know, not being able to elevate to another level? Is it health concerns? You know, what is it about that area? They're so focused on policing and they're putting money into policing that they don't work on rehabilitating that area. And when you have an area that puts way more money into policing, then you will have an area that will be an high crime area, because there is no growth in that area. There is no health in that area. There is no positive environments created in that area. It's just more policing. It's just more discipline. It's almost like when you want a child to do better, you keep popping, and all what you get from that is resistance. You don't get somebody that's in favor of doing well. You get somebody that ends up bitter, angry, hurt, defensive, instead of what they should be getting is more pouring into them. So you get better results. You get a better human. You get somebody who's focused on purpose and driven. And that's what you see, a system that is created to discipline instead of correct and rehab. And so, the system started way before, and at this point, I'm with a lot of other people. It just has to be eradicated. We got to start from the beginning and work our way through it. There's no need to have so much focus on policing and less focus on developing a positive and healthy community. So what do we know about no-knock raids? Because we want to talk about, the system and different things, how they're constructed. No-knock raids began with the Nixon administration. And if you know anything about Nixon, he's an ass. His administration is an ass. He was a terrible detriment to the Black community. Crack, cocaine, all of that, even though it was infiltrated to our communities, was this focus on getting the criminals off of the streets, getting these drugs off of the streets was highly focused in the Nixon era. And that's where we see the high percentage of Black men going to jail, to the result of now we see more Black men in jail than we have women in the United States. No joke. Look that up. There's more Black men in jail than we have women in the United States. So the no-knock raids started in the Nixon administration and was introduced by an intern, And from that intern, it went further and it was then started. I know, a complete mess. So the ACLU did a study on drug searches and raids and different things like that. And they concluded as many as 65% of deployments, there were no contrabands found. That means that a lot of times when they're doing these raids, they're not finding anything. So even that will let you know, it's time to rethink how we do things. It's time to rethink what our focus is on. We have in 2003, an NYPD commissioner stated that 10% of more than 450 households that did a no-knock raid, the officers ended up at the wrong address. We've seen countless times, people barging in people's homes and it's not the right home. That's just, a mess, chaos, not researching and different things of that nature. So we know that this system is failing. We know that it's not working in the favor of the community, that it's basically pouring money into a system that doesn't work, continuing to dump more in, continue to dump more in. From 2010 to 2016, 81 civilians died in no-knock raids alone, and the reality is that's a low number, right? But the reality is it doesn't need to happen. So as of last week, as of September of 2020, we do know that the family of Breonna Taylor did win the civil lawsuit against the Louisville Police Department for killing Breonna Taylor. I believe they won over $40 million due to her wrongful death. And so they did win that lawsuit. And then last week, we did have a press conference from Attorney General Daniel Cameron. He stated that Hankinson was the only officer that would be charged due to endangering the lives of Breonna's neighbors and what's called the wanton law. And a lot of people don't understand what wanton really is. It's basically recklessly shooting in an area unaware of who's around and what they're doing. And so because Hankinson shot into that window that had blinds, there was no way he would have known who was around or why they were around. And so that was the only charge that they thought to give Hankinson. Of course, he was given bail for that of $15,000. He most definitely posted that bail and he was out in a second. But we do hear that Attorney General Daniel Cameron was not going to charge the other officers involved. What do we know about Daniel Cameron? Daniel Cameron is a Republican, and he is rumored to have married the Senate seat leader Mitch McConnell's granddaughter. We do not know if that is confirmed. So allegedly he did marry Mitch McConnell's granddaughter. We do know that Mitch McConnell was present at that wedding. He is also a contender for that Supreme Court seat because Ruth G, I can't think of her last, Grover, I can't think of her last name, has passed away, and that seat is now open. And Trump did list him as a contender on there. And so we do see that Cameron is in most definitely a Trump supporter. We do know that all black ain't good, and that's why I hate the aesthetic of the first black person, the first black this, the first black that. That doesn't always mean that people are in favor. We see that with, you know, Cameron, you know, not even trying to figure out what happened during that day and how they got to where they got, you know. And so, you know, basically he has just said, hey, I'm not in any way, shape, or form going to be arresting these people because of the evidence that I have. And he said he was going to be releasing the evidence soon. One thing that I did want to say is that a lot of people are mistaking Kentucky and who rules what and who does what, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the governor is Democratic. The mayor is Democratic in Kentucky. Cameron is the Republican. And so a lot of times when we're looking at this and we're like, you know, Kentucky is a Republican state and there ain't nothing but Republican people there. It hasn't been Republican in quite some time. The mayor himself, he's been elected. This is his last run. He cannot run again. He is Democratic. We have a governor that's Democratic, but Daniel himself is a Republican. So let's just get that information correct as we talk about Breonna's case. Now, what we do see with that mayor in particular of Louisville, Kentucky, and his name is Greg Fisher, and he is the Democrat. He did say this in the beginning, and a lot of people did not listen to him as they were rioting, as they were protesting. They did not listen to something that he said that I found to be quite telling. He said, here's what's going to happen if they get fired. And he's speaking of the officers that killed Breonna Taylor. Let me tell you what will happen. They will not go to jail. If they do go to jail, they will appeal. If they do go to jail or if they are fired, they will appeal both. He said they will be back on their job within 1 week with back pay. He said that, you know, and that was one of the things that I was going, okay, now we have to think about some other things here, you know, as a result of, you know, really demanding that the officers be arrested. It has to be a whole overhaul of it all. You know, arresting them, they'll be out in a second. You know, just like the mayor said, they'll be out in a second. So we have to make sure that we place our focus on what we need to be placing our focus on. You know, so how do we move forward? How do we move forward knowing that Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General, is not going to arrest? The FBI does have the case, but there's no clear-cut information, or not clear-cut information. There's no clear certainty that the FBI is going to move this case forward as well, or it will lead to anything else. So with knowing that, how do we move forward? How do we begin to work on advocating for Breonna Taylor? We have to understand that memes and rallies and protests only get us so far. And I know that that one girl, I can't think of her name right now, brilliant, smart young lady. I know that she has been really out there. She moved out there to focus on this case, and they've been doing protests. They've had rallies, high profile people like Portia from the Real Housewives of Atlanta, Yandy from Love and Hip Hop. They've all been down there to protest, right? Everybody's been down there. Nick Cannon as well has been down there to protest. I understand that they see that as effectiveness, but we have to understand that it only goes so far, and that they were told by a number of people, even though that they were demanding that the cops be arrested, you know, there are other things that we need to put our focus on. We have to focus our attention on the overall structure of politics. We have to focus on politics, and our focus also has to be on policing, justice, different things like that. That is what the sole focus needs to be on. And I'm not saying these young ladies are not doing that, but what I'm saying is that these rallies and different things become ineffective in a system that is so bent on being right and being closed-minded and being secretive, that it's going to be really hard to demand for something that they're not going to give. Our focus is heavily on the presidential election. Meanwhile, there are positions that we have to vote for that require us to be way more focused. You know, the reason why we have an attorney general like Daniel Cameron is because we're so focused on getting Trump out that you get people like Daniel Cameron that comes in that's black. We think that they're for us, and they're not. So we need to focus on those types of positions, the position of judges, people in your community that play a role in how many black men go to jail, how much money is placed into policing the area and not advocating for the community. And so we need to focus on those things first, and then worry about those two nuts that we have to vote for. The focus should have really been heavily on the city of Kentucky. You know, thank God for Tone Talks. Thank God for Yvette Carnell, who continuously teach me about politics. Tone Talks did a talk with Dr. Kevin Crosby, and Kevin Crosby is a minister, is a pastor, is a leader in Kentucky. He has St. Stephen's Church in Kentucky, and then he's also in charge of a university down there in Kentucky. And what he found out, and I've been finding out a lot of information from him. And one thing that he said on a recent show that he did with Tone Talks is that 52.7% of the people that stay in the town that Breonna stayed in, which is the western part of Louisville, 52% have a high poverty rate. 52.7%. He also found out in recent years that the median income household for people who live in the western part of Louisville make $12,000 a year. $12,000 a year. And then you also see that 80% of people who live in that part of Louisville, 80% of them are renter. No one owns a home. No one owns a home. And that's alarming because the focus has been on protesting when I think that the focus should have been on educating, providing services, providing free health care and food to that community. I think about, you know, the Freedom Summer. You know, if you've never seen that Freedom Summer documentary on PBS, go to Amazon and it should be still free. But Freedom Summer, where, you know, people like Stokely Carmichael and Diane, I can't think of her last name, Diane Nash, who is like my hero. They went down to Mississippi and provided education about politics and how to vote, and, you know, provided education to the kids, provided food, and did all of this the whole summer. And they continued on their work. That should have been the focus, is on restoring that community. You know, Dr. Crosby says that all these celebrities with these t-shirts and all of these memes and, you know, all of this stuff, no one has contacted him on how to support that area, on how to stop the people, you know, who are like Breonna Taylor. Even Breonna Taylor wrote on a tweet one day, you know, on 12/12/19, she said, I can't afford groceries. You know, and I know that that was probably a joke for her, but at the same time, it's very true for some of the people out there. That is what you do. That's how you advocate. That's how you say her name, you know, is that the women that are still there, you take care of them. Also, you also have to remember that Kenneth was also supposed to be killed that night. He just so happened to make it. And I think the focus has been so much on Breonna Taylor that we forgot about Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker has a pending case against Louisville Police Department for their endangerment against him, them not announcing themselves, even though they're alleging that they did announce themselves. We know that they couldn't have because of the way that Kenneth acted on that tape. But we need to support Kenneth Walker as well. Because like I said, there are way more black men in jail than there are African-American women in the United States. That is a huge problem. That is a huge undergoing that we need to talk about. But Kenneth Walker does need our support as we fight for justice altogether. Kenneth Walker needs our support as well. So I hope that you've gotten way more information about Breonna Taylor's case from me. Thank you so much for tuning in. In the comments below, let me know if you were new to some of this information. Let me know how you felt about Breonna, how she relates to you. Let me know how you felt about, you know, the settlement. I know that's really huge. And I don't really want to talk about the settlement that much, but I will say this. You know, a lot of times due to our poverty, you know, these white organizations, these white police forces and these departments that's heavily provided for and supported through white financing and white corporations, it's so easy to throw money at poverty that will accept the recompense, that will accept the money instead of going after revenge. You know, I'm not saying anything, I'm not faulting her parents at all, but it says a lot when we accept a settlement. That means that we settled it through money instead of what really needs to happen, which is revenge. You know what I'm saying? We have to really decide on whether or not it's worth the money. It's worth the money, if that life is worth the money. And sometimes we're going to have to make the painful decision, even though we're in poverty, to remain in poverty in order to get justice. And so that's very important. And so let me know how you feel about that settlement. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, Anything that you have for me, I'll greatly appreciate it. Share this video, like it, leave a comment. I wanted to end the night, I wanted to end our conversation with something Breonna Taylor tweeted. She said, some things you may not know the reason behind it right away. Some things you may not know the reason behind it right away, but it'll eventually all start to make sense in the end. And so I know that none of this is fixed, none of it. But I do know that it is the start of a conversation that we've had before, we will continue to have until there are changes that can be made. And so it'll eventually all make sense in the end. This is OldskoolHeart. Thank you so much for watching. Please share this video, like it, thumbs up it for me, and I'll see you on the next video. Have a good day.